I see what you're saying. You keep mentioning the lowest common denominator being Jesus Christ, but you still haven't really explained what separates Charlie's death.
It's not because I have a bias towards the Republican Party. I am focused on the American Party. I care more about Americans than I care about the right or the left. I care more about humanity than I care about white or black.
Tell me you agree with me when I saw you kicking dirt in my eye. You're thinking about my baby. It don't matter if you're black or white.
There is a priority, a system that must take place in a man's mind in order to discern between chocolate and poop. I always led with the premise that Jesus was the lowest common denominator. And it wasn't because he was Republican, but because that he made sure that Jesus was always the foundation in all of his events. When you see clip after clip of him talking to these young adults about Jesus Christ,
Initiate retreat!
yeah, bye-bye.
So then, of course, everyone says, what's the first thing? Okay, well, the first thing is winning souls for Jesus Christ. Most important thing. Well, then, Charlie, what's the second thing? To make sure you can do the first thing.
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us.
Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if you told it to you.
Faceless, how are you?
I'm good. What brings you in today? You want to talk about Charlie and Jesus?
Well, I'll try to make it concise. I've followed you for a long time. I've been on your panel before for a variety of different topics, and I noticed that since Charlie Kirk's on a living, you've included him in your prompts, in your graphics, in your thumbnails. And I'm just curious what your relationship to Charlie was and why he seems to have been such a big part of your TikTok lives recently, because I had never heard you speak about him before.
One word, Jesus. The lowest common denominator is Jesus. He was unalived for speaking the truth on these college campuses, trying to reverse the programming. And when his voice was squelched, I had to stand up. We are Charlie Kirk. I am Charlie Kirk. Why? Because I'm not going to sit here and let my brother in Christ be silenced and let the world shit on his name, shit on his honor, and shit on the fact that he proclaimed Jesus more than any public figure that I know. Everywhere he went, he proclaimed Jesus. The thing that he wanted to be most remembered for was for his courage and faith in Jesus Christ.
I will be honest, though, in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, I felt a lot more passive about talking about my faith because I was kind of told not to, both by pastors and politicians.
Wow.
If you think about it, pastors are like, don't you dare bring that in here. Don't bring it in the church. I grew up in a church environment that you do not talk about politics. You do not talk about philosophy. You just talk about the Bible. We just do the gospel. That's it. Which, of course, is, I believe, unbiblical, right? Wow. Nehemiah, Jeremiah, Esther, Mordecai, Daniel, amongst many others, were all political figures.
Yes.
Fasted and prayed for the nation.
Even Deborah.
Yeah, exactly. The counselors to the king.
Yes.
So there's many examples of that. But then also politicians like, oh, no, keep that Christian stuff away. We just care about tax cuts and all this other nonsense. But look, I don't blame people for saying that I'm a political guy. That is my day job, right? And so I'm focused on the second most important thing that I think a human being can focus on. So then, of course, everyone says, what's the first thing? Okay, well, the first thing is winning souls for Jesus Christ. Most important thing. Well, then, Charlie, what's the second thing? To make sure you can do the first thing.
So why do I stand up and include my brother in Christ? Because that's what brothers do. I'm not going to just let his memory fade. I'm going to pour gas on the flames and make sure that it continues to burn. All right, I'm finished.
That makes sense. Although, I guess you mentioned lowest common denominator. I'm actually glad you brought that up. So you remember Charlie as your brother in Christ. Obviously, you denounced the violence by which he was slain, and that makes total sense. I also, too, would denounce any sort of political violence. But if the lowest common denominator is that he's your brother in Christ and that he was taken out with a great deal of violence, why is this the first time you're speaking out about political violence of this nature? It seems that you've made a very special case for Charlie here, but not for other innocent lives that were taken through the means of political violence. And if we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, I mean, obviously it's impossible for you to discuss every act of violence that occurs on this earth. And I don't think anybody should bear that responsibility because that's not realistic. But this is the first time I've heard you speak on it. You're not just speaking on it in one live. This has been a series series that you've been doing. You've been covering him now for weeks. Why now? Why is this the first time that we're really hearing you cover or at least celebrate someone that was an innocent life taken? Why not others?
Okay, so let me first start by saying I did not want to be political. My whole objective was Jesus. Jesus is my lowest common denominator. And whenever I would see Charlie pop up in my feed, I actually sat and listened because one, I acknowledged he was a brother in Christ. Two, I understood that he did his homework. He was very knowledgeable on the very topics he was discussing. So I gave him that credit. He's way more political than I am. And I don't want to be political, but the things that he was hitting up on, it actually touches up on the spiritual battlefield and the spiritual warfare that's taking place in the darkness. And when his life was taken, that was a catalyst, not just for me, but for many people. It was a call to action, a reminder that yes, believers in Christ will be persecuted by the world. I immediately thought of Stephen. I immediately thought of Tupac. How many brothers fell victim to the streets? Rest in peace, young Jigga. There's a heaven for a G. And when I started hearing all of these people saying the most horrid things about him, completely mislabeling him and misrepresenting him, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. My very first live, when one of my followers asked me, bro, you got to share your thoughts on Charlie. I was thinking that it was just another controversial statement that he said. And I was just Googling it up and then I find out. And then immediately the first person I speak with was saying, oh, I don't agree with any of the violence that took place, but if you spread a lot of hate, you get what's coming to you, essentially is what he was saying. You reap what you sow. And that's the most perverse way to use that sentiment, first and foremost. But when I started hearing all of these people echoing the same things, I said, no, this is wrong. There's a big problem here. We need to make sure that there are people on the right side of the fence that can yell just as loud as they can. And I assure you, I can yell just as loud as they can. I can be just as fierce as they can. And that's why I continue to leave Charlie in the background. Because anyone that has this programming, I'm going to break it for them. And if you don't want it broken, then you can always swipe up.
So you would describe your politics as right-leaning?
I would say conservative.
So, and listen, I'm entitled to my opinion. Like, we all have assholes, they all stink, just like opinions. I personally think, based on everything you just said, his death struck a chord in you because you're biased. And frankly, I don't agree with you that everything he said, that he simply walked everywhere and spoke truth wherever he went. And also, we don't even know, you mentioned Christians being attacked. We don't even actually know the full scope or motive for why he died. His death in particular, what sparked you to become political, is because his thoughts and ideas simply align with your own, and that's it. Was because of your political bias. And that's okay. I'm not asking you to apologize for it.
Again, I started this conversation off saying that my lives were not political because I didn't want to get involved in the political nature of things. Because when I see these MAGA Christian nationalists that will freaking wear gauze on their freaking ear after Trump was shot at, that stuff really bothers me. And a lot of these people have no understanding or wisdom of the word, and they follow blindly a charismatic leader such as Billy Graham. And then they are influenced to push an agenda that's not of God at all. So I don't like affiliating myself with that kind of NPC mentality. But when it comes to what I was saying, my lowest common denominator, my bias for Charlie was not because he was a right conservative. It was because he was a brother in Christ. Same thing goes for Martin Luther King. It wasn't because he was a Democrat that I still support him regardless of all of his flaws. It was because he was a brother in Christ. So when you say, I think you should be more honest, no, I have absolutely no problem telling you that I early voted for Trump, but that is not at all why I am standing up right now for the truth. I stand up for the truth because he was silenced for speaking it. And that, the lowest common denominator of that, was not the Republican Party. It was Jesus Christ. So understand that.
Okay, I see what you're saying. you keep mentioning the lowest common denominator being Jesus Christ, but you still haven't really explained what separates Charlie's death.
It's not because I have a bias towards the Republican Party. I am focused on the American Party. I care more about Americans than I care about the right or the left. I care more about humanity than I care about white or black.
Tell me you agree with me when I saw you kicking dirt in my eye. You're thinking about my baby. It don't matter if you're black or white.
There is a priority, a system that must take place in a man's mind in order to discern between chocolate and poop.
Well, I appreciate the clarification, but I want to address two specific things that you said. Number one, Charlie Kirk was very agenda-based. And then the second thing I want to say was...
Wait, hold on, time out, bro. His main agenda stemmed from Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus, not MAGA and not Trump. So stop tying that and pinning that to Trump. Just because he was the main player for the Republican side does not mean that he's the lowest common denominator. Jesus is the lowest common denominator.
You're assuming his lowest common denominator was Jesus, and that's where I disagree with you, because his entire career was built off of his political loyalty to the Republican Party, and then late in the last couple of years, it's been his loyalty to Trump. He was the person to make you become political and not other acts of violence. And you kind of danced around the question because you explained again the second time that didn't answer my question was because it was an injustice. But there is death and violence all around us that is a great injustice, whether or not it's because of someone's faith or political views or because they're at the wrong time and place. But I'm asking you to explain that discretion. Like, you chose Charlie as the catalyst to introduce politics, and you said it's because it was an injustice, but that doesn't really explain what separates Charlie from other extremely politicized and media-covered acts of violence.
No, I never said injustice. Injustice was never about why I was talking about Charlie. I said that he spoke and fought against injustice. I always led with the premise that Jesus was the lowest common denominator. And it wasn't because he was Republican, but because that he made sure that Jesus was always the foundation in all of his events. When you see clip after clip after clip after clip of him talking to these young adults about Jesus Christ.
Initiate retreat!
Yeah, bye-bye.
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us.
Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if you told it to you.